Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm really excited for today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at leadership and empathy and how those two things can come together to make a really amazing company culture.
Sounds good.
So you send over a ton of excerpts from Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek,
Yeah.
plus some bonus material too. So we're going to break all that down, figure out what makes a great workplace, maybe even spark some ideas for all of you listening. What do you think? What really stood out to you from all this material?
Well, I think Sinek does such a good job of blending, real stories with the actual science of how our brains work. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We'll look at everything from military leadership to those feel-good chemicals in our brains to how all this might be different for the next generation of workers.
Okay, so speaking of military leadership, Sinek really goes all in on this idea of the circle of safety, and he uses the Marines as his main example.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, why the military? It seems a little intense.
It's actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Okay.
In the military, the stakes are as high as they get. It's literally life or death.
Right.
So over centuries, they've had to figure out how to create an environment where people feel safe enough to do their best work, even under immense pressure. And a lot of that comes down to trust in a true circle of safety leaders. Put the well-being of their people above everything else. Everyone feels like they belong. They have each other's backs no matter what.
So take like a pack of wolves.
Exactly.
But instead of hunting, they're tackling spreadsheets and deadlines.
Totally. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Sinek argues that companies that don't prioritize their people, that are all about the numbers and nothing else,
Right.
they actually create a dangerous environment internally. Think about it. Constantly watching your back, worried about office politics,
Oh, yeah.
the next round of layoffs, all that stuff. And that takes a toll.
Oh, for sure. He even brings up some research to back that up.
Yes.
The Whitehall studies.
The Whitehall studies precisely.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So these studies looked at British civil servants, and they found something pretty shocking. The people lower down the chain of command, the ones with less control over their work, they actually suffered more stress and health problems than those at the top.
So you're telling me that feeling stressed at work isn't just me being soft.
Right.
It's actually affecting my health, on a biological level.
Absolutely. It's not just in your head. And there's even more fascinating science to unpack here. Sinek talks about these 4 key chemicals in our brains, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, and how they're at play in every workplace, shaping our motivation, our trust, even how well we work as a team.
Okay, let's break those down. First up, endorphins. I usually think about those in relation to exercise, runner's high and all that. But Sinek says they actually evolved to mask pain. So helping our ancestors run away from saber-toothed tigers even if they had a sprained ankle.
Exactly. It allowed them to push through the pain escape danger. And that same mechanism is at work in the modern workplace.
Okay, so how does that actually translate into the modern workplace?
Well, think about that feeling of pushing through a tough project, working late to hit a deadline.
Oh, yeah.
That sense of accomplishment, even though you're exhausted, that's partly endorphins at work masking the discomfort.
Okay, so next time I'm pulling an all-nighter, I can blame it on my ancient ancestors.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, what about dopamine? Sinek calls it the achievement chemical,
Yeah,
the one that keeps us striving for goals.
right. And it feels great, which is why it can be addictive,
Okay.
almost like a slot machine. Think about the feeling of getting a notification on your phone.
Uh-huh.
That little hit of satisfaction, that's dopamine. Or the feeling of checking something off your to-do list. It's all about anticipation and reward, but it can also lead to problems if we're not careful.
So we're all just dopamine-addicted lab rats responding to email notifications.
It can feel that way sometimes.
Okay, that's a slightly depressing thought, but I can definitely relate. All right, what about serotonin? This is what Sinek links to leadership.
Yes. Serotonin is all about that feeling of pride and respect,
Okay.
that sense of being valued and appreciated by others. It's that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you receive positive feedback, a promotion, even just a sincere compliment.
Yep.
Remember Sally Field's famous Oscar speech?
Oh, yeah.
You like me? You really like me? She was bathed in serotonin in that moment.
That's a great example. Okay, last but not least, oxytocin. This is the love hormone, right?
That's right, but it's so much more than just making us feel cuddly.
Okay.
Oxytocin is all about connection, trust, and collaboration. It's what allows us to form strong bonds, both personally and professionally.
Okay.
And the amazing thing is, it's contagious. Sinek tells a story about 2 strangers helping someone on the street. Even just witnessing acts of kindness gives us an oxytocin boost.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So it makes you wonder if our constant need to check our phones is actually making us less happy, less connected to the people around us.
That's a great point, and it leads us right into Sinek's point about generational shifts.
Okay.
He suggests that boomers who rose to power during times of economic upheaval may have created a culture that's a little too focused on individual achievement
Yeah.
and those short-term wins.
So how does that play out in a real workplace? I mean, have you ever felt that pressure to prioritize profits over people?
Yeah, I think a lot of us have probably felt that, especially, in the corporate world. Sinek points out that this focus on, me, it can actually undermine, the foundation of a healthy work environment. He brings up some pretty stark examples like Stanley O'Neill, the CEO of Merrill Lynch, who was known for being ruthless. Laying off thousands of employees even after 9/11, all to boost those short-term profits. It's like the human cost was just an afterthought.
Yeah, it's like that whole greed is good mentality taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
So if that's the wrong way to do things, what does a company that gets it right actually look like? What are some of the examples that Sinek brings up?
Well, he offers a bunch of counterexamples.
Yeah.
Companies that are bucking that trend and proving that you can be successful while also taking care of your people. One that really stood out to me was Costco. Their co-founder, James Sinegal, was all about creating a culture of shared success. He paid his employees higher wages, offered great benefits, really invested in their well-being, even when Wall Street was telling him he was crazy.
And it clearly worked.
Yeah.
I mean, Costco is known for having these incredibly loyal employees, and they do amazingly well. Even during economic downturns, it's like he created this system that's built to last, based on human values rather than just chasing profits.
Exactly. And another great example is 3M. They're the company behind, tons of innovations, including the Post-it note, which is actually a perfect example of their culture. They encourage their employees to experiment, take risks, learn from their mistakes. In fact, the Post-it note came from a failed glue.
Wait, so the Post-it note was a mistake?
It was. The glue didn't stick very well. Initially, it was considered a flop.
Wow.
But instead of just tossing it out, this 3M scientist kept playing with it, trying to find a use for this, bad glue. And then another scientist realized it was perfect for creating temporary bookmarks.
Yeah.
And bam, the Post-it note was born.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I never knew that. Okay, so their motto is innovation from interaction.
Yeah.
So they're basically saying that the best ideas come from people bouncing ideas off each other, not being afraid to kind of experiment and try new things.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like the opposite of what happens in companies that are really hierarchical, where everyone's afraid to speak up or rock the boat.
Exactly. That kind of environment just kills creativity. But, this problem isn't just limited to the corporate world. Sinek actually uses the U.S. Congress as an example of how a culture of distrust and division can completely cripple an organization.
Wait, Congress? How does that tie in?
Well, he talks about how back in the 90s, Newt Gingrich, who became Speaker of the House, really pushed for this more confrontational style of politics.
Yeah.
He saw compromise as a weakness,
Okay.
and it led to this massive breakdown in civility and cooperation. Congress became less about solving problems and more about scoring points.
So basically everyone's so busy trying to win that they forget that they're all supposed to be on the same team working towards the same goal, which is serving the people.
Exactly.
It sounds a lot like those toxic workplaces we were just talking about.
It's the same dynamic, just on a larger scale. But, amidst all this negativity, Sinek does highlight this heartwarming story about two members of Congress, a Democrat and a Republican, who actually became friends despite their political differences.
Okay, in this political climate, a bipartisan friendship sounds like a unicorn sighting.
Right. But they met on this trip to Romania, spent hours talking, and they realized they had way more in common than they thought. They started having regular dinners together, and their friendship just blossomed, even though they often disagreed on policy.
That gives me a little bit of hope for humanity. It's like a reminder that even when things seem super divided, that human connection is still possible.
It's a powerful reminder, and it speaks to Sinek's broader point about the importance of empathy and understanding even when we don't agree. Now, shifting gears a bit, another concept Sinek dives into is the rise of shareholder value and how that's impacted corporate culture.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? I feel like I hear that term thrown around a lot.
Right.
But I'm not always sure what it means.
So it's basically this idea that the main goal of any corporation is to maximize profits for its shareholders, the people who own stock in the company. And it sounds logical on the surface, but Sinek argues that this laser focus on profits can often lead to this really short-sighted view, and sometimes even encourages cutting corners or ignoring ethical concerns to boost those bottom lines.
Like what happened with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Exactly. Sinek argues that BP's obsession with cost-cutting and their disregard for safety regulations directly contributed to that disaster.
Right.
It's a tragic example of what can happen when profits are put ahead of people and the environment.
It's like that old saying, penny wise and pound foolish. So is Sinek saying that shareholder value is inherently a bad thing?
Not necessarily, but he is pushing back against the idea that it's the only thing that matters. He advocates for this more balanced approach, one that prioritizes long-term value creation and considers the well-being of all stakeholders, employees, customers, the community, even the planet. It's about recognizing that businesses have a responsibility that goes beyond just making money.
Okay. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But realistically, how do we shift from this profits above all else mentality that seems so ingrained in our culture?
Well, Sinek believes it starts with awareness. We need to recognize that there are different ways to measure success, and that sometimes doing the right thing might mean sacrificing some short-term gains for the sake of long-term sustainability and a healthier work environment for everyone.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if individual companies start to adopt this more ethical approach, we're still swimming in this larger culture that often rewards ruthless behavior and instant gratification. Speaking of instant gratification, Sinek has a lot to say about the abstract generation, basically millennials and Gen Z. He paints this kind of bleak picture, arguing that they're struggling with technology addiction, impatience, and difficulty finding fulfillment in their work.
It's a tough position for them to be in. They've grown up in this world of constant stimulation, instant access to everything. But Sinek also points out that, they've been dealt a pretty rough hand. I mean, they're inheriting a planet in crisis. They're facing huge economic inequality, and they're constantly being told they're the lazy generation.
Yeah, it's like no pressure or anything.
Yeah.
So if that's the diagnosis,
Right.
what's the prescription? How do we help this generation thrive?
Well, Sinek believes that while they face unique challenges, the abstract generation also has this incredible potential. They're tech-savvy, they're idealistic, and they're hungry for meaning. He encourages them to find their purpose, connect with their communities, and use their talents to make a positive impact.
So it's like instead of just accepting this doom and gloom narrative, they need to be the ones to rewrite the story.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure.
They're facing some pretty real obstacles.
Absolutely. And one of the things Sinek highlights is this rising rate of ADHD diagnoses among young people. He questions whether this is a true epidemic or if it's partly a result of our, fast-paced, hyper-stimulating culture.
So are we basically pathologizing normal kid behavior?
Yeah.
Because we're just not used to anything less than instant attention and perfect focus.
That's one of the questions he's raising. And he also criticizes this tendency to jump to medication without addressing the underlying social and environmental factors. Maybe we need to create a world that's more conducive to different learning styles and attention spans.
That makes a lot of sense. That leads to another even darker issue that Sinek brings up, the rise of school shootings.
Yeah.
It's terrifying that this has become a horrifying reality for so many young people.
It is, and Sinek argues that, it's a symptom of society where people feel increasingly disconnected and alienated, where kids are struggling to find that sense of belonging and purpose. He talks about how many of the perpetrators of these shootings were young people who felt isolated, bullied, ostracized.
Yeah, it breaks my heart to think about that.
Yeah.
So what can we do to create a world where kids feel safer, more connected?
Well, Sinek believes it starts with fostering a culture of empathy and inclusion, where everyone feels valued and respected. Schools and communities need to do more to address the root causes of bullying and social isolation.
Right.
And of course, he also advocates for stricter gun control laws to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place.
It's a multifaceted problem that demands a multifaceted solution.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about ADHD school shootings. Are there any other specific challenges facing the abstract generation that Sinek highlights?
He also talks about the issue of technology addiction, which we touched on earlier.
Right.
But he really dives deep into how smartphones and social media have created this culture of constant stimulation and instant gratification. It's like we're training our brains to be addicted to those little dopamine hits we get from notifications, likes, comments.
And I am definitely guilty of that.
Yeah.
It's like I can't go 5 minutes without checking my phone.
It's something most of us struggle with these days. And Sinek argues that this constant connectivity is actually making us less connected in the real world, less able to focus, less present in the moment. He's not anti-technology, but he urges us to set boundaries to disconnect regularly and to prioritize those real-world interactions.
Yeah, it's like anything else. Moderation is key. So it sounds like Sinek's message to the abstract generation is pretty clear. Put down your phone, find your purpose, and go save the world.
Right.
But I imagine that's easier said than done. Any practical advice on how to actually do that?
Well, he does offer some really concrete suggestions. Yep. He encourages young people to find a job they're passionate about, even if it doesn't pay a ton of money right away. He stresses that, finding work that gives you a sense of meaning and fulfillment is more important than chasing a paycheck.
It's like money can't buy happiness, but finding a job you love can at least get you a down payment on a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And he also encourages them to get involved in their communities, volunteer their time, connect with people who share their values. Building strong relationships is key both for personal happiness and for making a difference in the world.
So it's about recognizing that we're not in this alone. So Sinek is basically saying, hey, abstract generation, the world's a mess, but you've got the tools to fix it. Now get out there and make it happen. Yeah. But let's be real. Even if every young person suddenly found their purpose and started volunteering every weekend, we're still facing some massive systemic problems.
You're absolutely right, and Sinek acknowledges that. But he argues that the first step to creating a better world is to become aware of the problems we're facing. We need to educate ourselves about issues like climate change, economic inequality, social injustice, read books, watch documentaries, talk to people who are working on these issues.
Knowledge is power, or at least the first step towards it.
Yeah.
But once we're informed, what then? How do we translate that knowledge into action?
Well, Sinek encourages us to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, and to challenge the status quo. We need to think outside the box, come up with new and innovative solutions to these complex problems. And we need to remember that change doesn't come from just waiting for someone else to fix things. It comes from the ground up. We need to get involved, speak up, and demand better.
Okay, so we need to get informed, think critically, and get involved. But are there any more specific actions we can take to start making a difference right now?
Sinek suggests a few things. He encourages us to be more conscious consumers, supporting businesses that are ethical and sustainable. Buy local, reduce our consumption, choose products that are made with recycled materials.
So basically vote with our dollars. I can get behind that.
Exactly. And he also encourages us to become more politically active, whether it's voting for candidates who align with our values or contacting our elected officials to advocate for policies we believe in. Our democracy depends on the active participation of its citizens.
Don't just complain about the system. Get in there and try to make it better. And what about on a more personal level? Are there things we can do in our own communities to make a difference?
Yeah. Absolutely. Sinek is a big advocate for getting involved in our communities, whether it's volunteering our time or just being a good neighbor. He argues that, giving back, even in small ways, is one of the most fulfilling and rewarding things we can do.
So be the change you want to see in the world. But it sounds like we need more than just individual action, right?
Right.
We need leaders who are willing to step up and create systems that are actually designed to benefit everyone.
Yes.
Not just a select few.
You're hitting on another key point that Sinek makes.
Okay.
He argues that we need this new kind of leader for the 21st century, one who is empathetic, collaborative, and visionary. And he outlines some key qualities.
Okay, what are those?
Well, first and foremost, empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Then there's collaboration, the ability to work effectively with others to achieve common goals.
Got it.
Vision, the ability to see the big picture and articulate a compelling future state. Integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Courage, the willingness to take risks and stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. And finally, humility, the quality of being modest and respectful of others.
Okay, so basically we need leaders who are more like Mr. Rogers and less like Gordon Gekko. Sign me up for that.
Yeah.
But it's not like we can just snap our fingers and create, this new generation of leaders. So how do we actually cultivate those qualities?
Right. Well, Sinek believes it starts with each of us. Leadership isn't about a title or a position. It's about character and action. We can all choose to lead by example, to inspire others, and to create a more positive and supportive environment in our own spheres of influence.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to take charge. It's about each of us stepping up and becoming the leaders we want to see in the world. That's powerful. But honestly, it can feel a bit overwhelming.
I know what you mean.
To think about fixing all these massive problems,
Right.
I'm just one person. What difference can I really make?
Well, Sinek reminds us that change doesn't happen overnight. It's about, small, consistent actions day after day that eventually add up to something bigger.
Right.
Think of it like ripples in a pond. One small action can create a ripple that spreads outward, impacting others and creating this wider impact than you might imagine.
That's a comforting thought. So instead of trying to boil the ocean, we just need to focus on those small, manageable actions that we can take in our own lives.
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of Sinek's most powerful concepts, the circle of safety.
Okay.
He argues that, it's the foundation of a strong and healthy culture, whether it's in a company, a community, even a family.
Yeah, so how do we create that circle of safety in our own lives, with our own teams, our families?
Well, Sinek outlines a few key steps.
Okay.
First, be transparent and honest with the people around you. Set clear expectations and provide regular feedback, both positive and constructive. Empower others to make decisions and take ownership of their work. Recognize and reward good work, publicly and privately.
Okay.
And most importantly, create a culture of respect and appreciation where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for their contributions.
It sounds so simple, but I can see how, implementing those things could make a huge difference in creating a more supportive and empowering environment. Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, it feels like there's a lot to think about, a lot to process. Any final thoughts, anything you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway from all this is that, we have a choice. We can continue down the path we're on, prioritizing those short-term gains and individual success at the expense of everything else.
Yeah.
Or we can choose a different path. A path that prioritizes empathy, cooperation, and long-term thinking.
It's like we're at a fork in the road,
Yeah.
and the choices we make today will determine what kind of world we create for tomorrow.
Sinek actually offers this really interesting analogy. He compares the modern workplace to the dangerous savannas our ancestors roamed. Back then, survival depended on trusting each other, working together, putting the group's needs ahead of your own.
It's like that old saying, it takes a village.
Exactly.
Except in this case, the village is a company or a community or maybe even the entire planet.
That's a great way to put it. And Sinek argues that we've kind of lost touch with that ancient wisdom. We've built these systems that reward cutthroat competition and self-interest.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the consequences of that all around us.
Burnout, inequality, climate change, political polarization, the list goes on and on.
It's a pretty bleak picture. But Sinek isn't all doom and gloom. He believes we have the capacity to change, to rediscover those values of cooperation and empathy that helped our ancestors thrive. It's not going to be easy, but it's possible.
So we need to channel our inner cave person, but instead of hunting woolly mammoths, we're tackling climate change and building a more equitable society.
I love that. Yeah. And one of the things Sinek emphasizes is the power of giving. He argues that it's one of the most powerful ways to create meaning and purpose in our lives.
That makes sense. I mean, when I volunteer at the local animal shelter, I definitely feel a sense of purpose, like I'm making a small difference.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be about, grand gestures or donating tons of money. It can be as simple as, volunteering your time, donating to a cause you care about, or even just performing random acts of kindness.
Paying it forward, spreading those good vibes. I like it.
And, when we give to others, we not only make the world a better place, but we also make ourselves happier and more fulfilled. It's a win-win.
Okay, so Sinek is giving us a pretty clear roadmap here.
Yeah.
Build circles of safety, embrace the power of giving, channel our inner collaborative cave person.
I love it.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that change really starts with each of us individually.
Absolutely.
What advice does Sinek offer for those of us who are ready to take that first step?
He encourages us to ask ourselves a really powerful question. What kind of world do we want to create?
Wow.
And what role do we want to play in making that happen? It's about, getting clear on our own values, our own purpose, and then taking action, even if it's just one small step at a time.
It's like that quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. But sometimes it's hard to know where to even begin.
Right. it can feel overwhelming. But Sinek reminds us that even small acts of kindness and courage can have that ripple effect. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend who's struggling volunteering an hour a week at a local charity, or just making a conscious effort to be more present and attentive in our interactions with others.
It's those little things,
Yeah.
those everyday acts of empathy and connection that can start to shift the tide.
Exactly. And I think that's a really hopeful message. It reminds us that we're not powerless, that each of us has the capacity to make a difference.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, let's recap the key takeaways. We've explored the power of the circle of safety, the importance of empathy and connection, and the dangers of a culture that prioritizes profits over people. We've learned about those fascinating brain chemicals that drive our behavior, and we've delved into the challenges and opportunities facing the abstract generation.
Yeah. And we've discussed the importance of finding our purpose serving others and creating a legacy that matters.
And most importantly, we've been reminded that we have the power to change things.
That we can choose to create a different kind of world, one where everyone feels safe, supported, and valued.
It's not going to be easy,
No.
but it's absolutely essential.
It is.
And it starts with each of us.
It does.
So our final challenge to you is this. What small step can you take today to make a difference? What action can you take to bring more empathy, more connection, more purpose into your own life and the lives of those around you? That's something to think about and to act on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making a difference.